illustrates. It's that simple. Picture specific. The words do little more than add a soundtrack to a visually told sequence. It is the picture that tells the story. An example of this is when you see a text such as vroom vroom or beep beep that mimics the sound that we usually hear in our environment. This classification focuses more on visually telling the story to the readers. Next one is the duo specific. Both words and pictures send the same message. Each one may seems each one seems to be telling the exact same story without adding or subtracting any context. Additive. Well, for additive, words amplify or elaborate on an image or vice versa. So either the words or pictures add something specific that is not in the words or the picture. However, in this technique, either words or pictures will or can dominate. Next one is parallel. Words and pictures follow different courses without interacting. In this classification, words and pictures tell different stories that only make sense within the context or just by using our imaginations. Neither one supports or follows the other. Next one is montage. Words are treated as integral graphical parts of the picture, where words become images or images become words. So an example is having the words montage floating over the character's head, or having a happy face become the letter A in the word happy. Lastly is the interdependent. The picture and the words go hand in hand to convey an idea that neither could convey alone. So similar to additive, but here both words and images add something specific to the experience. Losing one would totally change the story of the frame. They have an equal relationship. Significance of typographic conventions. So highlighting the most important words or concept is the dominant style of textual presentation in comics. This presentation of textual material builds on comics awareness that all materials that it uses has a visual component which is then available for manipulation for narrative and aesthetic effect. Use of boldface typography in comics does not correspond to stress in spoken language as emphasis in written text usually does. Different typographical choices can reflect different voices or character traits or states of mind.
Going on with the last part of frames, panels, and gutters, it will be worthwhile at this point, therefore, to expand the view of comics beyond that offered by MacLeod. We focus on two developments, which both of which are concerned with visual narrative, but take very different starting points. The first is the linguistically inspired characterization of visual narrative in comics, developed in several important publications by Kahn, and the second is the most sophisticated approach to comics that has been developed applying notions from semiotics, that of Lowenstein. Now, these two position themselves, speak very different languages. The former, that of cognitive neuroscience and empirical investigation, the latter of semiotics and post-textual description. I believe that would be all, and since we have discussed this part of comics, we shall now move on to the next exciting part.
Definitely, we are now going to talk about comics and visual narrative according to Neil Cohn, which will be led by our lovely guests, Cielo and Leila.
Visual Narrative and Comics by Neil Cohn. So who's Neil Cohn? Neil Cohn is an American cognitive scientist and comics theorist. By the age of 10, he was already selling his own created comics via mail order catalog. He began working in the comic industry at the age of 14 by helping to run convention booths throughout his teenage years. He has been fascinated with drawings and comics his whole life. His research offers the first serious scientific study of the cognition of understanding comics and uses an interdisciplinary approach combining aspects of theoretical and corpus linguistics with cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience. Visual language. Visual language is a system that uses mostly images or symbols to convey meaning. Because of their patterns, the visuals can be understood by a large group of people. It is used in many forms of contemporary communication, and it is predominantly used in comics, and each comic is drawn in its own visual language. Examples of visual language include the Japanese manga style and the American superhero style. The use of images and sequences may be similar to the use of words in sentences and in spoken language, and may constitute a visual language. An example of visual language is a diagram, a map, and a painting. A map is an example of visual communication because it transmits visible signs that an observer decodes using vision. Those signs can be these structural units include line, shape, color, form, motion, texture, pattern, direction, orientation, scale, angle, space, and proportion. There are still those who uses comics as language as if this is a self-evident truth, just as there are those who consider proposals of any close relationship between comics and language to be self-evidently absurd. Just as some form of communication, it is usually empty of content because language proper has some specific properties, semiotically, cognitively, and socially, that need to be addressed in detail when relating to any form of communication back to verbal language. Psycholinguistical experiments test model of how the brain and the human cognition system carry out perception, production, and representation of language. It has been probing these structures for decades, and it is now uncontroversial that a variety of relationships are constructed during processing. Consider the following examples as might be used as an introduction of linguistics. The first example is the farmer watched the birds with the binoculars. If we were perverse or linguists, we could ask why birds had binoculars. When a reader or listener encounters the weed, they must either determine where with the binoculars is attached to the word watch, or construct a noun phrase where the binoculars is attached to the birds, resulting in birds with the binoculars. But the structural organizations are possible in theory, but there's still the latter attachment is still more preferred. So the second example is the farmer watched the birds with the long beaks. For me, the second example is much more understandable because if you encounter the word beak, it determines the word with long beaks that is attached to the verb watch. So the word long beaks is attached to the birds, that resulting in birds with long beaks. Kahn argues that this must be the case for comics as well, since when interpreting a sequence of panels, readers and viewers do much more than simply connecting one to the other. So the brain has some work to do to sort out the preferred interrelationships, to select one alternative over the others, and to throw away anything that it does not want. Comic book panels have properties that can be used to motivate structures, the holdover and thereby group a collection of panels into larger units. So in MacLeod's account, for example, no statement can be made about which kinds of inter-panel relations might hold and when they are simply applied to panels as best one can.
Neil Kahn establishes structural organization. So, structural organization bring constraints on just what kinds of sequences and hierarchical organization are going to produce. So, when we say constraints, it is to support processing and attributing meaning to panel sequences. Just like in language, structures are there in order to make sense of what is being interpreted. In this lesson, we have certain structural configurations within panels. First, we have the shared environment. There are configurations where time is not moving on, but which shows aspect of single situation. The second one, we call it the same character. There are also configurations which may focus in and present details. Lastly, we have the time shift, which is configurations where time moves on. Kahn claims that while it is possible to create a shared environment from more complex elements, it is not possible to take a shared environment and attach more specific elements, just like the same character, because it is uncertain of which internal elements of the environment the more specific element can refer. As you can see, we have four panels here, decomposing an exchange of blows between two people in a typical microscale fashion. We have cuts between viewpoints and even in the third panel, an extreme closed up. Neil Kahn believes that this sequence is simply understandable and that the extreme close-up in the third panel will be semantically connected to the person seen in the second panel. The one on the right would be consistent with the type of linear unfolding that the sequence of panel transitions would imply. So, what factors involved in this sequence allow us to understand it this way? Semantically, it shows the tension between the two people in the first and second panel. It can be understood as simultaneously with the state of a punch. The second and third panels need to be grouped before they can be used together with the first panel to make a composite unit that is then capable of participating in a time shift to the next moment in the depicted event sequence. There are additional organizational properties that we can see operating here. First, we have the narrative organization, which is then information that is inherent to the medium or to storytelling. We also have some basic principles of linguistic organization, such as reoccurring patterns of use, or what we call it distributional properties, which motivate seeing panels as playing similar function in their respective semiotic system, as words do in the system of language. The third one, we have the syntactic organization in language that Kahn makes detailed proposal for a syntax of sequences of panels. According to Kahn in 2007, panels are not the visual equivalent of words, and neither are elements of an individual image. Rather, both words and panels play similar structural roles within the confines of their own system of grammar. This is where the analogous to the way that sequential words take on grammatical roles. In the present approach, narrative grammar consists of 5 core categories. We have the establisher, initial, arc, peak, and release. First, we have the establisher. It sets up an interaction without acting upon it. Next, the initial initiates the tension of the narrative arc. The third one, we have the arc that marks a medial state of extension, often the trajectory of a path. And the next one, we have the peak, marks the height of the narrative tension in the point of maximal event structure. Lastly, we have the release. It releases the tension of the interaction. The peak is where the most important things in a sequence happen, and it motivates the context for the rest of the sequence. So, we have reached our discussion regarding comics and visual narratives. Of course, it is only fitting to talk about the cross-theme and semiotic of comics.
The next topic will be handled by the guest of ours, Shirley. Please keep the ball rolling.